Good afternoon, everybody. I hope that we're all doing what we can to beat the heat. I just dropped my daughter off quickly at volleyball camp, which is thankfully indoors. Just feel like when I step out for more than 30 seconds, I start melting. Thankfully, I wasn't one of the people in Columbus that lost their power yesterday. So I know that most of it has been turned back on, but it's my mother and sister-in-law didn't have power last night. I spoke with them this morning. They were hot. So hopefully all of you are here today because you are interested in doing business with the federal government. This webinar training is a part of a series of trainings leading up to the Ohio Business Matchmaker, which will be on July 13th and 14th. So just under a month away. My name is Jill Nagy Reynolds, and I'm with the SBA Columbus District Office. This webinar training is in partnership with the Ohio University PTAC, the SBA, the Ohio Development Services Agency, the Minority Business Assistance Center, and the Small Business Development Center. So we have been working as a team for the last 16 years to put together the content for the Ohio Business. And we are very pleased that it will be in person again this year. So if you're able to join us at the Nutter Center in Dayton on July 13th and 14th, please try and make time in your schedule to get to this in-person event. So without further ado, our topic for this afternoon is twofold. We're going to talk about government contract pricing, which is very, very important and not often thought about until a small business contractor or contractor gets a contract award or considering estimating a project. All of those things are very fundamental in terms of your success in government contracting. So the first hour, we are going to hear from Dr. Renee Butler, who is the Learning Director for Price, Cost, and Finance at the Defense Acquisition University. Her level of knowledge is unprecedented. We're very, very fortunate to have her present on this topic. And then after that, we will have Carol Smith, who is with the Wide Area Workflow Office, I believe at the Defense Finance and Accounting Service. I don't have her title in front of me, but she's going to help us understand, once you're awarded a contract, a defense contract, what you need to do with that. So without further ado, Renee, can you go ahead and unmute yourself and introduce yourself?
Sure, Jill, thanks. As Jill said, my name is Renee Butler, and I'm the Learning Director for Price, Cost, and Finance at DAU. In that capacity, I'm responsible for the development and maintenance of all the learning assets that are related to pricing for the DoD. And learning assets are not just courses. We can have webinars, we can have videos, we can have micro learning assets, just a whole host of things that we do at DAU that are available for the most part to the public. A few of our assets are restricted to the acquisition workforce or the DoD, but many of our assets are available to the public. So in pricing, what we deal with primarily in the FAR is any aspect of the FAR that deals with pricing. So the pricing portions of commercial, simplified acquisition, sealed bidding, certainly FAR 15.4 contract pricing is our primary source of guidance. But then we also touch on Part 30 with cost accounting standards, Part 31 with cost principles and procedures, Part 32 on contract financing, and then some in Part 42 on contract administration. The slide that's up right now, here are the topics that I was asked to cover today, and then I added in one on my own because I know it's a big issue right now. So we'll talk at a very, very high level on pricing policy, a little bit on how we analyze proposals to determine the price fair and reasonable, the solicitation methods we use, and that really has to do with the part of the description on setting a pricing strategy. Also talk a little bit about inflation. That's the topic that is getting a lot of attention right now. And then hopefully provide you with some sources of information and training that you can take after this presentation. Next slide, please. So as I said, pricing policy at FAR 15402 is the primary source of information and guidance that we use in the federal government. It basically says three things. It says when contracting officers are awarding contracts, they must determine first that the prices paid are fair and reasonable. Secondly, that they price each contract independently. And third, that we not include any contingencies. So what does that mean? There is no definition in the FAR that says what fair and reasonable means, but the general consensus is that contracting officers should pay what a prudent business person would pay, and that the price we pay is fair to both parties, both the government and the contractor. It is not in the government's best interest to award a contract at a price that is too low and places too much risk on the contractor, because then there becomes a risk of termination because of default. And that is not going to get the government the goods or services that we need, or it would result in a delay. So we want to be fair and reasonable to both parties. Secondly, we need to price each contract independently. And I know that businesses probably don't do that or don't look at it that way, but the federal government is so large and there are so many contracts and different services and agencies that we have no way as a contracting officer to know all of the profit and the loss and the activity on every single contract. So for example, we can't consider gains or losses on a previous contract when pricing the instant contract. So we need to price each contract independently. And finally, we don't include contingencies for the most part. There are two types of contingencies: those that we can reasonably foresee and price with some accuracy, and those that we cannot. So for the former, we may include some pricing or some cost in our contract price. For example, a scrap rate. We know that if you're in construction or if you're in manufacturing, there is going to be some level of scrap. We can determine how much that is and how much that would cost with reasonable accuracy. So a scrap factor is typically added into the contract price. That is a contingency that we can foresee and we can price with reasonable or relative accuracy. For the latter, those contingencies that either we can't foresee, or even if we can, we just simply can't price them at the time, we might consider some sort of contract language that would allow us to then make changes later. For example, and I'll talk about this in a little bit, during a period where we have very volatile prices in labor or materials, we may include some sort of economic price adjustment clause in our contracts that say, if this happens, this is how we'll handle it. And what that does is it provides some protection for our contractors, but it also provides protection for the government, because we are not paying for something that may never occur. So that's the general pricing policy in 15402. Next slide, please. So how do we analyze contract proposals when we receive them? And how do we get a fair and reasonable price? There are a variety of proposal analysis techniques outlined in the FAR, and which technique we use really depends on the contract type and the extent of competition. So the two primary techniques I have listed in this slide for analyzing a contractor proposal are price analysis and cost analysis. With price analysis, we're required to use this when certified cost or pricing data are not required. When we use price analysis, we are doing some sort of comparison, and I'll talk about the different techniques for price analysis shortly. Cost analysis is used to evaluate the reasonableness of individual cost elements when certified cost or pricing data are required. And then we will still use price analysis to determine that the overall price is fair and reasonable. The analogy that we often use to distinguish the two is the difference between custom building a car and buying a car that was kind of mass manufactured on a production line. When you build a car, you would take a look at each individual element, the materials that go into it, all of the components, the metal, the tires, so on and so forth. There's labor that goes into building that. There would be some type of overhead or burdens associated with those direct costs, such as fringe benefits or processing purchase orders, material handling charges, those types of things. With price analysis, you're simply comparing the prices of a certain make, model, and year of a car with the same make, model, and year of a car, perhaps from different dealerships, or with similar makes and models, with similar features, mileage, etc. So with cost analysis, we're looking at all the individual components, but we still perform an overall price analysis just to make sure that the overall price paid makes sense, even if each individual cost element was verified. So I mentioned that we use price analysis when certified cost or pricing data are not required, and cost analysis when the data are required. So when do we require that data be certified? And we'll answer that on the next slide, please. So unless an exception applies, and I will talk about that, certified cost or pricing data are required to be submitted before accomplishing any of the following actions. And basically, it's the award of a negotiated contract, the award of a subcontract at any tier if the contractor and each higher tier subcontractor were required, and the modification of any sealed bid or negotiated contract if those meet the threshold. And the threshold for obtaining certified cost or pricing data is $750,000 for prime contracts awarded before July 1st, 2018. But the new threshold for any contracts awarded after that date is July 1st, 2018. So the current threshold is $2 million. So what is a negotiated contract? Basically, it's a contract that is not awarded under FAR Part 14 sealed bidding, but instead is awarded under FAR Part 15 contracting by negotiation. Negotiated contracts can be awarded competitively or non-competitively, or what is often termed sole source. Some negotiated contracts that are under the simplified acquisition threshold are awarded under FAR Part 13, simplified acquisition procedures. Next slide, please. So what are certified cost or pricing data? So again, it's data that is submitted by an offeror on a negotiated procurement as required by the Truth in Negotiations Act, which we sometimes shorten to TINA, or the Truthful Cost or Pricing Data Statute. Kind of long story short, there's a public law that was enacted years and years ago. It has been recodified in the United States Code. And so for the Department of Defense, it's 10 USC Chapter 271. And for other federal agencies, it's 41 USC Chapter 35. But what certified cost or pricing data are all facts that as of the date of agreement on price or another date that the buyer and seller agree upon, that both buyers and sellers would reasonably expect to affect price negotiations significantly. So what are some examples? Things such as vendor quotes, make or buy decisions, change in production methods. It does not include the judgment of the contractor, but it does include the facts upon which those judgments or those decisions were made. And so the point here is that Tina puts the government on a level playing field in certain circumstances as the contractor. As long as we are provided the facts, we can make our own decisions and judgments. The point is the data must be submitted. If you're interested in more information on this, because it's quite complex, we have a course called Con 7700 Defective Pricing. If you simply Google it or go to www.dau.edu, you can search for it, and it is an online course, self-paced, and anyone can enroll in it. Next slide, please.
Renee,
go
I have
ahead.
a question.
Yeah. Sure.
So to obtain the certified cost data, is that something that small business contractors should be using like an accountant for, or their CFO, or how do they verify to the government that it's certified?
I would, okay, that is a great question. So first of all, let me say that for the most part, even though there is not an exception for small businesses to submit certified cost or pricing data if required, there's a similar exception for use of cost accounting standards, and sometimes people get those confused. There is no small business exception. However, I would anticipate, or I expect that most small businesses are involved in competitive acquisitions. And you will see that adequate price competition is an exception to submitting certified cost or pricing data. Now, if you happen to be awarded a contract and there was an exception based on adequate price competition, but later that contract was modified and no exceptions applied, and it was over the threshold of $2 million, then the company would have to submit certified cost or pricing data. So what does that mean? There is a form called the certificate, and it has to be someone in the company who has, knowledge. It doesn't have to be like a CFO or the CEO, but it has to be somebody who can act on behalf of the company, and they have to sign the certificate. And basically what it says is, we're certifying that we have submitted, there's language in it. I don't have it with me right now, but it's in the FAR under FAR 15.4. And there's a very specific form. It's a certificate, and it's signed by someone in the company that has knowledge and basically what they're certifying is that everything that we used, basically all the facts that we used to come up with our price, we are giving you that information. So we are giving, and the information has to be what we call accurate, current, and complete. So it has to be the most current information. So if you originally submitted the proposal, and as part of the supporting documentation, say you had a vendor quote, but before contract award, before you agreed on the price, you got another vendor quote in, and that vendor quote was lower, you're obligated to submit that. And if later, say an audit came in and found that you gave us the quote that had a higher price and we relied on that, but yet you had knowledge of a quote with a lower price, and that's what you actually use that, but we relied on this other data, then we are entitled to recoup the difference. That's what's called defective pricing. Did that answer your question, Jill?
Excuse me. Yes, but it formed another question.
Okay.
So how can how do firms determine if they have adequate price competition?
I'm going to cover that in just a minute.
Okay, good. Okay.
Okay,
so,
good. Sure. Yeah, that's coming up.
All right. And the other question, the form that you mentioned, when firms are submitting a proposal, does the solicitation have that information? Like you need to go here to get the certified cost form?
The clauses are in the solicitation.
Okay.
Yep,
So
yep.
that just
Certainly.
reiterating, reading the whole thing to everyone.
Right. And
the
certificate is called the Certificate of Cost or Price, Certified Cost or Pricing Data. It's right there in the FAR. And that there are clauses. I'm not going to be able to say them off the top of my head right now. It's 52. Oh, what is it? 52, 215. -10 and 11, I think. That's just off the top of my head, but you'll see the clauses in the contract if it applies.
All right. And thank you so much, Renee. And I just want to tell everyone else, if you have questions, I forgot to mention that when I started, put them in the chat and I will ask at an appropriate time.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So here is what you were asking, Jill, the exceptions to certified cost or pricing data. The exceptions are if we have prices that are based on adequate price competition, prices set by law or regulation, or if we're buying commercial products and commercial services. So what is adequate price competition? If you go to FAR 15403-1, paragraph C1 tells us that adequate price competition exists when two or more responsible offers competing independently, so basically no collusion or price fixing, submit priced offers that satisfy the government's requirement. So this is where we compare prices that are submitted in response to the solicitation. So we're comparing them against each other. And so see here, we really prefer adequate price competition, because there the marketplace is telling us what a fair and reasonable price is, because our vendors should be submitting a price that they believe, is covering their cost and giving them a reasonable profit, but not so high, that they're not going to get the business, right? So the marketplace is setting the price. Really what TINA does, the submission of the certified cost or pricing data, it puts the government on a level playing field with the contractor when these exceptions don't exist. So adequate price competition is clearly our preferred method of determining the price fair and reasonable. Now, I will tell you that there is a difference in not the definition of adequate price competition, but what happens if you're a contracting officer and you believe there is competition out there. So you put your solicitation out on the street and then you only get one offer. Is that adequate price competition? You need to look at the supplements to the FAR based on the agency that you're submitting your proposal to. In the FAR, that may in fact constitute adequate price competition if certain criteria exist. In the Department of Defense, it's a much tougher hurdle to overcome, where we may in fact end up going down the road of sole source and asking for data to evaluate. So anyway, first exception, adequate price competition, by far our preferred method of determining a price fair and reasonable. Secondly, if prices are set by law or regulation, probably the best example of this are utilities that are set by a public utilities commission. Another one is commercial products and commercial services. The rationale behind this is if we're buying a commercial product or service, again, there's a market-based price. However, there are some commercial products and commercial services out there that there is an 8-part definition in the FAR of what I think it's still 8 parts. It just changed, but of what constitutes commercial product or commercial service. There are a couple definitions in there where the product could be commercial, but the acquisition situation acts more like a sole source. And in that case, we still have an exception to certified cost or pricing data, the submission of that, but we have to do a lot more work, quite frankly, to determine that that price is fair and reasonable, because we don't have that market setting the price. So there's your third exceptions to certified cost or pricing data. Next slide, please. Okay, there we go. So if cost or pricing data, just to reiterate, are not required, we use price analysis. This is the most common technique that we use. When we do price analysis, we are doing some sort of comparison. So we just talked about adequate price competition. That's when we're comparing the proposed prices that are received in response to that instant solicitation. That by far is our preferred method. If we don't have adequate price competition, or sometimes in addition to adequate price competition, we may also compare the proposed prices to historical prices paid. First of all, we want to make sure that those historical prices paid had a solid determination of fair and reasonable, and we need to account for any differences. So if it was bought 3 years ago, we may have to account for inflation. If it was a different quantity, if there were different terms and conditions, like FOB origin versus FOB destination, if there were warranties. So we need to, make sure that we're kind of comparing apples to apples when we're looking at historical prices. Those first two techniques are our preferred techniques. Then, if we can't do that, we might go down the list, and these are kind of in order of preference. We might use some sort of parametric estimating method, like a price per square foot. We might compare with published price lists. We could compare it with the independent government estimate. We could go out and do market research for the same or similar items and use that as our basis of comparison. And if all else fails, we may have to obtain what we call data other than certified cost or pricing data. It may look very much like certified cost or pricing data. It's just not certified, so you don't have all the administrative remedies if later it turns out not to be accurate, current, and complete. Next slide, please. So when we're required to obtain cost or pricing data, we use cost analysis. When we use cost analysis, offers are required to submit their proposal pricing in accordance with FAR Table 15-2, which can be found at FAR 15408. And we also then evaluate profit or fee. And here's really what we're looking at when we do a cost analysis. And I won't read all of that to you, but these are the types of things we're looking at. Next slide, please. And so we're going to look at every cost element to determine that each cost element is fair and reasonable. So we're going to look at your direct costs, like your direct materials or your subcontractors. We'll look at your labor hours and rates and dollars. We'll look at other direct costs. The most common other direct cost is travel. Next slide, please. And then we'll look at indirect costs. So with direct costs, those are costs that can be identified with a single cost objective, or in other words, a contract. With an indirect cost, they can be identified not just with one single cost objective, but with two or more. And so then there's a way that we can allocate the appropriate amount of indirect cost to each cost objective based on kind of a beneficial causal relationship. And examples of indirect costs would be like your overhead, your G&A, your fringe, facility capital cost of money. Those are the types of indirect costs that, you know, would be accumulated in a pool and then would be allocated over some base. So for example, you know, fringe benefits might be allocated over a direct labor hour or direct labor dollar base, or material handling charges might be allocated over a number of purchase orders or something like that, something that makes sense, that has that causal beneficial relationship. So we'll be taking a look at indirect costs. And then we also evaluate profit and or fee. Profit on a fixed price type contract, fee on a cost reimbursement type contract. We're required to use a structured approach for determining profit or fee, where we take into account different risk factors. In the Department of Defense, we use something called the DD 1547, the Record of Weighted Guidelines application. And again, you'll just have to check with whatever agency you're submitting your proposal to see what form or what their criteria is for analyzing profit or fee. Next slide, please. Then we have other proposal analysis techniques. Now, these techniques are used in conjunction with price analysis or cost analysis, not on their own. Cost realism analysis is one of them. Cost realism analysis must be performed on competitive cost reimbursement contracts to determine if the estimated proposed cost elements are realistic for the work to be performed, reflect a clear understanding of the requirement, and are consistent with the contractor's proposal. And so the difference here is that and I'm going to talk about this in a little bit, but the difference with a cost reimbursement contract, let's say you have a cost plus fixed fee contract. In a cost reimbursement type contract, the government bears all of the cost risk. We're going to pay the contractor's allowable cost, allowable, allocable, and reasonable cost of performance. If a contractor does not understand the requirement, if their pricing is perhaps unrealistic, maybe too aggressive for what they've proposed in their proposal, if it's not consistent with how they say they're going to do the work, they might come in with a really low price. But keep in mind, the government's not going to pay that really low proposed price. We're going to pay the actual cost of performance. And so the objective of cost realism is for us to come up with what we call a probable cost. We are not comparing at this stage the offers against each other. We are comparing the offer's technical approach with their cost to see if it's realistic. And we look at the probable cost. Then, you know, there is an analysis or a comparison of the different approaches. What we want to do, you know, what could happen in a cost realism analysis if we go with somebody that seems to be the lowest cost, but we didn't do this analysis and they actually came in with inflated or their actual cost of performance were much more. We could end up in the government paying much more than if we had gone with another proposal that was more realistically priced. So this is another technique that we use. This is on competitive cost reimbursement contracts. Next slide, please. And then again, these are some other, I'm not going to go in great detail on all of these, but these are some other proposal analysis techniques that we could use in conjunction with price analysis or cost analysis. One of the most important ones here is technical analysis. I'm a contracting officer. I can certainly analyze indirect rates and things of that nature, but I'm not a civil engineer. I'm not an aeronautical engineer. I'm not a logistician. I don't know if a certain technique is appropriate, if the amount of materials or labor mix is appropriate. That's when we go to our technical folks and we'll say, hey, here's the technical volume, evaluate this, give us your report, and then we'll compare that to the cost volume, and we'll we'll make sure that we do an analysis of the entire proposal. So again, here are just some other proposal analysis techniques that we use in conjunction with cost analysis and price analysis. Next slide, please. So one of the things I was asked to cover is how do you determine your pricing strategy if you're a small business out there and you're proposing to the government? And what I can tell you is it really depends on the contract type, the extent of competition, and the dollar value of the acquisition. I can't really tell you how to determine a pricing strategy for your business, but what I can tell you is what the government is looking for and how these factors affect our analysis. So for example, if you are proposing on a firm fixed price contract, the contractor bears the cost risk there. The government is going to pay the price stated in the contract, regardless of the actual costs incurred. In this situation, we, the government, are looking to make sure that we don't pay too much. If it's competitive, we assume adequate price competition will do that job for us. However, if it's, say, a firm fixed price sole source and no other exceptions apply, we are going to obtain certified cost of pricing data, and we are going to analyze each cost element, including profit. On the other hand, as we were just talking about with cost realism analysis, if we have a competitive cost reimbursement contract, the government bears the cost risk. We will pay the allowable costs incurred, so we want to make sure that the price submitted is realistic, because regardless of what is proposed, we will pay the actuals. So we want to make sure that an offeror doesn't propose an unrealistically low price only for the government to end up paying much more than what we might have paid had we selected a different contractor, or even worse, we get into a situation where the contractor can't perform, and then we're not meeting our mission requirements. So again, I would just say, take a look at the contract type, take a look at who bears the cost risk, what the competition looks like, and the dollar value, and structure your pricing accordingly. Next slide, please. Okay, so this wasn't something that I was asked to talk about, but I I participated in a small business webinar, a couple weeks ago, and this was the #1 topic of conversation, was about inflation. And so what about inflation? At DAU, because of the demand for information about how we treat inflation on government contracts, we recently released a course called Con 7470, Inflation and Economic Price Adjustments. If this is something you want to learn about, I highly recommend you go again to www.dau.edu and search for that course and enroll. We've had a lot of our industry partners ask about equitable price adjustments based on inflation. And really, there are two aspects to this topic. The first is, how does inflation affect current contracts? What I have on this slide and the next slide is what we put into our course. It really is based on contract type and whether there is already some sort of clause or mechanism in the contract to adjust the price. For example, if you have a firm fixed price contract with no clause built in to address inflation, the contracting officer simply does not have the authority to increase the contract price just because inflation exists and prices of fuel and, gas and material and supplies and labor is increasing. Contracting officers earn their warrants. It's called a contracting officer warrant, and it provides them with the authority to bind the government. However, they may only bind the government to the extent of their authority, and they must follow the acquisition laws, policy, and regulations. Plus, there's the matter of consideration. By simply increasing the price on the contract without getting something in return, that's kind of a basic violation of contract law. So if you have, I hate to say it, it's not that I'm not sympathetic or that the contracting officer isn't, but if you have a firm fixed price contract with no clause filled in to address inflation, contracting officer simply does not have the authority to increase the contract price. However, with other contract types, there is a measure of protection. So for example, with incentive contracts, we have a cost sharing ratio in there where the government accepts a risk of the portion of that increased cost. With a cost type contract, such as a cost plus fixed fee, the government bears all of the risk of increased costs due to inflation, and we will pay those allowable costs up to the funded amount of the contract. Next slide, please. So what about future contracts? And this slide right here just gives you a little bit more information on different contract types, but what about future contracts? It may be if prices for materials or labor are particularly volatile, that the contracting officer might consider an economic price adjustment clause. And what an EPA clause allows for is both upwards and downward adjustments in the contract price based on certain conditions. Again, I would suggest you go to the Con 7470 course. We have an entire lesson in there on the various types of clauses and how they operate and the conditions under which a contracting officer could in fact negotiate an EPA clause. Next slide, please. So that really is all of the information I have on contract pricing, pricing strategy, inflation, but I did want to leave you with some sources of information and training. At DAU, as I told you, I'm the learning director for pricing. We also have a learning director for small business. Mr. Ken Karka is our learning director for small business, and he has so many sources of information and training for you. This summer, we partnered on a summer small business pricing series. The link is here. You can see the dates and the topics if you're interested in any of those. I know a couple of them have already passed, but if you go to the DAU events webpage, we record all of our webinars and we will have the slides and the recording there so you can go back and look at previous webinars. The individual that is presenting this summer small business pricing series with Ken and I is Joe Greger, and he is with the Defense Contract Audit Agency. So a great opportunity to ask him questions from a DCAA perspective. Again, Con 7470, if you're interested in what can be done about inflation. Another great tool for you, I know a couple weeks ago when we talked to small businesses, there was a question on, how do I price my future contracts in this kind of period of inflation? If one of the things I mentioned was that there are great government websites out there, such as the Bureau of Labor Statistics or the Bureau of Economic Analysis. They can give you what has happened as far as various indices, whether it's the Consumer Price Index, the Personal Consumption Expenditures Index, the PPI, Producer Price Index. those tend to look backwards. There are commercial forecasting firms, but you can also forecast your own rates, and if you go to the contract pricing reference guides, there's a lot of information on there about, well, how would I build an index series for my business, for my cost, and how would I kind of project that into the future. So that's a great source of information. There is also a small business series, subcontracting and small business participation, coming up. Ken wanted me to mention that one. Next slide, please. And that just continues on this page where you'll see the link to register for that. There are a lot of courses at DAU meant for small business and small business professionals. SBP stands for Small Business Program. So we have SBP 110, 120, and 220. Those are all online courses and available. The other thing Ken does is he does an All Things Small Business podcast every month. And you can go to that website and you can see all the past podcasts and what's coming up. I think you can subscribe to his RSS feed so you get emails about it. Another great resource for small businesses there. Next slide.
Renee,
Yes.
when you get a moment, I think
Yeah.
explaining a little bit more about the Defense Acquisition University, because there may be participants that have never heard of it and what it's used for.
Sure.
I know that when I was new to PTAC, I'd never heard of Defense Acquisition University. And so are those trainings that are available, are they free to everyone, or is there a cost associated with it? So perhaps talk about that as well.
Yeah, let me just get this last slide and then I'll talk a little bit about us. This is another one of Ken's projects. You see the website there. And this is kind of a one-stop shop for, if you've ever heard Ken talk about small business, he is absolutely passionate about small businesses, importance to our defense industrial base. And so he hosts all of these things that I've been talking about. This website will get you to kind of everything. So that's the last slide I had. To your point, Jill, so Defense Acquisition University, quite a long time ago, we had what we call the consortium schools. The Air Force had the Air Force Institute of Technology. There was a Navy school, an Army school, and we combined into Defense Acquisition University. And our purpose really is to train the acquisition workforce. However, there has been a move, at least the last 10 years that I've been here for 16 years now, but really to partner with industry. And I would say in the last couple of years, there has been a big push to helping our small business partners. And so we offer a variety of courses, a variety of learning assets. So we have courses. Our courses could include virtual instructor-led courses. They could include online courses that are kind of self-paced. Only the acquisition workforce and DoD employees can take our built courses. However, and that really has a lot to do with the platform, quite frankly. Even our federal partner, contracting officers can't get into some of those. Again, it's just a kind of a platform IT software issue. But our online courses, you absolutely can go in. If you go into the DAU iCatalog, and it's easiest, seriously, just to search DAU iCatalog and it'll pop up. You will see all of the workshops, all of the courses, whether they're online courses, continuous learning modules. And when you click on one, you will see apply for this course. When you click apply for this course, there is a process if you are not a government employee to get a DAU user ID and then you can apply for an online course. Our courses do not cost anything to anybody. So you can do that. We have webinars. I would highly suggest, again, it's easiest just to Google, but go to DAU events. That will bring up our events page. And we have all sorts of webinars. We have small business webinars. We have pricing. We have a pricing series called Striking the Balance. We have the Small Business Summer Series. We have a series coming up, and I didn't put it on here, but if you go to the events page, it's going to start on June 29th or 30th. I'm not sure. Let me look at my calendar. I think it starts on June 29th. But we partnered with some of the professors, some of the associate deans from George Washington University Law School, and they will be giving a series of 6 webinars this summer throughout June, July, and August on topics such as procurement integrity, corruption, fraud, sustainable procurement, just a host of those types of topics that I think are important, not just for the government, but for industry. Because if you don't know what the rules are, you can find yourself, you can find yourself in some hot water. So I would highly suggest, and those are free. You just simply have to register on our webpage. And you can certainly submit questions beforehand. I generally moderate that particular session. Ken and I moderate the small business session. We also have media. You can go to DAU Media. We have a variety of powerful examples, short little videos that explain different topics. So, I would just go to dau.edu and just go and explore and see what's out there on our public facing page, because there are tools. We have a whole tools page that's available to people to help you, do various things. Oh, let me, Jill, I know I've got a few more minutes.
Well, and before, I want to ask Sharon, if you can go
Yeah.
back a slide, Sharon, and go to the slide with all of the small bit, no, but yes. Okay, go forward now. The one with all of the links, the small business series. Okay, so one other thing I want to support with what Renee is saying, and actually we got a comment from an attendee that went to the DAU site. She just said, wow, I'm on your site now, and the breadth of knowledge that can be obtained through these training courses is phenomenal. Absolutely it is. The other thing I want to say, as an SBA employee, I'm required to have just a level 1 of contracting. It's called FACC level 1. So I take the training through the Defense Acquisition University to stay to keep my certification. So I have to do 80 hours every 2 years. So small businesses that take advantage of these courses, these are the same courses that contracting professionals have to take. So when you take these courses, you're learning what they learn. And I think that's just so valuable. Just if you can, become a part of that podcast. I didn't even know there was such a thing. I mean, there's just such a world out there of resources. So
right. And I'll tell you, like I said,
yeah.
Ken is absolutely passionate. And one other resource we have that everybody thinks is so valuable. Again, go to the website, find the subway map. We call it the subway map. It's the brainchild of a former professor. She was at DAU. I miss her. She's now over at NCMA, National Contract Management Association. But it looks like a subway map. She's based on the East Coast, and she came up with this idea of having all these stops. And basically the stops are all of the parts of the FAR. And if you go to that let's say you're interested in pricing or you're interested in source selection, you go to that subway stop and it will list all of the courses, all of the tools, all of the webinars, everything that we might have on that topic in one place. So if I had to recommend, other than Ken's one-stop shopping here for small business, his doing business with the Department of Defense page, I would recommend the subway map, because you can kind of hone in very quickly on if it's construction. Well, gosh, go to the construction stop on the subway map and see everything that is offered. So anyways, so that's what I have, Jill, unless anybody has any questions.
Just more kudos about the DAU website. What is Ken's last name?
It's Carkuff, Carkhuff. I'll shoot you his email.
Okay, thank you.
And I might drop it in the chat too once I'm done here.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions for Dr. Butler before she finishes up here? And it's such a topic that we all need to know about, but it's so technical that if you're first introduced to it, it's kind of like, I don't even know what to ask. So it's great to have this information, but it's also for everyone to know there's the significant learning curve on this. So there's no way but right now to start learning how to do these things, because when you are submitting a federal proposal, just know that there's a contracting team behind that proposal that has that training, that not only what Dr. Butler teaches, but also different aspects of the FAR, and just all of the things you'll need to know when submitting your proposal. All of the trainings today were packed with information. I have about 8 pages of notes to work through just to formulate questions.
Oh, well, but Jill, let me add this too. Boy, every time somebody says something, because I tell you, there are sometimes I go on our website and I'll be like, wow, I didn't know we had this. Because we have so many people doing so many good things. But I know that somebody mentioned that I have to go through my notes just to formulate questions. Well, we have something called Ask a Professor. And if you have a question, you can go on to Ask a Professor and you can pose your question. And whether it's in program management, contracting, pricing, logistics, science and tech, whatever, you can pose the question, and then we have people that'll funnel it to the right person, and they'll get a response back to you, or at least give you additional resource. I had one the other day. Somebody had a question about defective pricing, and we were able to get a response back to them.
That's great. I think the more resources that are available to help in a layman way, the better, because it can be when someone's first getting started, it can be a little bit daunting. But yes. I just want to thank you again for your time. Just to remind everyone that this was recorded, and the presentation, the recording and the slides will become available both on the Ohio Business Matchmaker website and on the Ohio University PTAC website in about a week. All right, well, thank you so much, Dr. Butler. It was great to hear your presentation today.
You're welcome, Jill. Thanks.
All right, and we will now change topics to another very important topic about the wide area workflow. Carol Smith, if you could unmute your line, please, and do a share screen. And I'll start my video so you can see. Oh, yep, it looks like it's working. I see the Zoom screen. Oh, perfect. And the only thing you'll need to do then is to maximize. Yep, you've got it almost. Yeah, the little, that one. Looks great. All right. I saw the little mute button come off, so I think you're off of mute.
Okay, can you?
Hi, Carol.
Hi, Jill.
Oh, yeah, I can hear you just fine. Okay.
Hello,
so I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time today to present to our small businesses that might be participating in the Ohio Business Matchmaker. I thought that learning about, well, the Matchmaker Committee, all of us thought that learning about federal contract pricing was important, but also the other side of it is once you first get a contract, what do you do? So your area of expertise is in defense. It's the Department of Defense. Invoicing, really. I know that it's much more involved than that, but it's essentially when a contractor gets a contract, they have to get paid by the government. If it's a defense contract, it's through wide area workflow. I'm simplifying it. That's why you're giving the presentation, but I'm very happy to have you on board today. And I will turn it over to you if you can just introduce yourself and give your background as well.
Okay, thank you, Jill. And actually, it's my pleasure to be a part of your conference today. My name is Carol Smith, and I work at DFAS in Columbus, Ohio. DFAS is Defense Finance Accounting Service, and actually, we do the accounting and pay the bills for Department of Defense. There are multiple DFAS offices. We have, of course, one in Columbus, one in Cleveland, one in Indianapolis, one in Limestone, Maine, and one in Rome, New York. And then we also have a DFAS Europe site. The office that I work in is called Business Integrated Services. And in our office, there are some electronic commerce platforms that we are involved with, and we actually test on. EDA, Electronic Document Access, is one of the electronic platforms that we test on, and also including wide area workflow. I have, over the years, I've had the privilege of not just testing, being on the test team for wide area workflow, but also training it. I've gone to many different government agencies and installations to help the government side on how to use wide area workflow, as well as presented and done classroom training for the contractors and vendors interested in how to use wide area workflow so they can be paid. And so today's presentation is just going to be what I would call an introductory or a high-level overview of wide area workflow, why you need to use it, and how it works. So with that, and Jill, I think that you will, at certain points, if there's any questions, just stop me and we'll address them.
Absolutely. Yep. Thank you for that. If anyone has any questions for Carol as she's presenting, if you can please put them in the chat and I will ask her at an appropriate moment. Thank you.
So in this presentation, we're going to talk about some of the electronic commerce tools overview. We're also going to, of course, focus on wide area workflow. I'm going to speak a little bit about the payment systems, because wide area workflow is not a payment system. It's just an invoicing system. It's where you start to provide or create your invoice so it can be paid out of one of the payment systems at the DFAS locations. I'll show you where you can get help with using wide area workflow at the end, and also the tutorials that we have to help you in using wide area workflow. Now, I'm using the term wide area workflow. You've all probably have heard wide area workflow. Some people will call it WAWF. Some people will call it WAF. I call it WAF, but we have a suite, and it's called the Procurement Integrated Enterprise Environment, also known as the PI suite. And in this PI suite, they have consolidated some of the major modules regarding getting payment into this one suite. So it used to be that if you wanted to access maybe my invoice or EDA for your electronic contracts. You had to go to different locations, different websites, different passwords. And under the Pi suite, they pulled that all under one suite. And so with that, we have wider workflow, we have my invoice, we have EDA and other modules in one single location. Now to access the Pi suite on this slide here, you have one way to access it, and that is using user ID and password to log in. Now on the left side of the screen, you see where it says login with certificate. That's only for government users. So on the government side, we log in with what we call our CAT card, Common Access Card. And so, but on the vendor side, you would log in with user ID and password. And then once again, as I mentioned, with the Pi suite, we have what we call standard modules in the Pi platform. We have EDA, and EDA stands for Electronic Document Access. That's where the contracts have been uploaded from your contracting office. DFAS, we do not upload your contracts into EDA. Those contracts, modifications, awards, solicitations, etc., are all electronically uploaded from your contracting office. If at some point in time you're looking for your electronic or digital contract in EDA and you don't see it, that call will go to your contracting office. And then we also have as a standard module. Now remember, Pi has multiple modules, but a standard load would be these three. So then we have wider workflow identified in the center there, and wider workflow is your invoicing module. So it allows you to submit invoices, either EDI, electronic, electronic data interchange, or FTP, or you can just manually key it in and create your wider workflow invoice that way. And then we have My Invoice. My Invoice is a wonderful module to have at your disposal. If you have submitted an invoice in wider workflow and you want to know when it's going to be paid, what is the scheduled pay date, and if it is scheduled to be paid, what is the amount? Is there interest added on to it? Was there a discount taken? And so all that information is in My Invoice. So it's a tool right at your fingertips. No longer do you have to call customer service office and be on hold and wait. You can just log in to the Pi suite, click on the My Invoice module, and find out upcoming payment information. Now, wider workflow is the old IRAP system. I don't know if any of you were around a few years ago, but wider workflow has gone through several name changes. And so if you've ever heard the term IRAP, Invoice Receiving Report and Property Transfer, that's what that stood for, it just had a name change. And so at one point, wider workflow went from WAWF to IRAP, and now it's back to WAWF, or wider workflow. Wider workflow is on a secure web-based system utilized for creating, approving, accepting, certifying, and viewing electronic transactions associated with requests for payments and shipping notices. When you log into the Pi suite, you'll notice in the URL, it will say HTTPS. So it lets you know that it is on a secure web-based site. Wider workflow supports DoD's goal of moving to a paperless acquisition process. And what I want to say is that if you have contracts that are outside of DoD, they may have that agents or that department may have their own electronic invoicing system, but within DoD, wider workflow is the electronic invoicing solution. So when your contracts are written by your contracting office, they should have the default clause in it, 252.232-7003, which mandates the use of electronic invoicing. And in this case, it will be wider workflow would be the answer. If you have this default clause in your contract and you submit a paper invoice to the pay office, that invoice will be rejected back to you. The benefit of using wider workflow or electronic invoicing, it eliminates paper. Okay, back in the days before we had electronic and paper invoices were submitted, the pay text that we had, they would just have mounds and mounds of invoices, receiving reports, contracts in files on their desks that they were processing through. Once we went to electronic invoicing via wider workflow, the payment process just became much more sufficient. It's global accessible. So wherever you are, as long as you have access to a computer, if you go to the library, if you use your laptop, if you go to your neighbor's house and use their laptop, all you need is access to the website and your user ID and password to get in. Because it is electronic, it eliminates the lost or misplaced documents. When we were using paper invoicing to pay you with, it was not unusual for the pay office to contact you and ask you to maybe fax your invoice back in because it was lost. And so, you know, because it's all online, there's no possibility of losing your submitted invoice. Also using wider workflow, it maximized the benefit of discounts. So if a vendor offered a discount, which said to the government, I will give you a portion of my invoice amount if you pay me sooner than what I am due. We were able to take, the government was able to take discounts more readily because we had a much more efficient process in place. And also it decreased the amount of interest penalties that the government paid out because we were paying, because we had late payments. The government pays interest on payments that are not timely based off of the Prompt Pay Act. And so when we went to electronic invoicing, the amount of late payments dramatically reduced, and therefore the amount of interest that the government paid out also reduced. Using electronic invoicing, wider workflow, it increased the accuracy of documents, accuracy of payments, because we would, when a paper invoice was submitted in and you had a description of what you were invoicing on, our pay technicians would read the description of your invoice, look at your contract, do a best match against which CLIN or contract line item number to post that against. And or sometimes if we had new technicians, they would just start at the first CLIN and then go down to the second CLIN, even if that was not the CLIN that was invoiced against. And so going to electronic invoicing, it just made the accuracy of payments such more improved. It's on a secure and auditable transaction site. It enables and captures UID, unique identifiers, those who have the responsibility for identifying a UID for inventorying their commodity. And also it allows the tracking of radio frequency identifier data or RFID for anyone who has that requirement as well. Also, we have indicators in wider workflow to track the movement of government furnished property, also known as GFP, or government furnished equipment, GFE. So we have indicators on your invoice. If you have government property that was loaned to you, but you're using it, but it's on loan to you from the government, you can identify on your invoice that this is a government furnished piece of equipment in your possession. Why must you submit invoices electronically? It's the law. And on the previous slides, you know, I just explained the benefits of us going electronic versus when paper invoices were submitted. And once again, within DoD, wider workflow is that invoicing, electronic invoicing solution. And once again, the DFAS clause 252-232-7003 mandates the use of electronic invoicing within DoD. To use wider workflow, you have to identify the type of role that you would use it in. Now, on this slide here, I have multiple roles identified, but there's only really 2 or 3 for you as the vendor or contractor that you would actually be interested in. The other ones are roles that the government uses. And so starting at the top, the vendor, that is your role. So when you use wider workflow, you would self-register in the system and identify that you're a vendor and that you will use wider workflow in the vendor role. That role itself allows you to create documents, it allows you to correct documents within the system itself. The next role we have here is the inspector and the acceptor. That is a government role. And so the inspector or acceptor, that is the person that you're doing business with. And so say, for instance, if you're doing business with a DLA, they have someone who is managing that contract. They're normally called a COR, excuse me, contracting office representative, that has the responsibility of managing your performance on that contract. Or you may have, if you're doing business with DCMA, you may have a QAR, quality assurance reviewer. Either way, regardless, all your contracts, the government has someone in place who's going to manage how you are performing on that contract. Are you delivering on time? Are you providing services on time? What you delivered, does it conform to the contract? Is it what they asked for? Was it delivered properly? Was it damaged upon arrival? And so that is the job of the inspector and the acceptor. And so until a document is signed for acceptance, even if you've submitted an invoice, DFAS cannot render payment until we hear from that acceptor. And so that person is also has a role identified within wider workflow on your contract. If anyone has a Navy contract, some Navy offices have a role called an LPO, Local Processing Office role. And so the Navy said, if we're going to use wider workflow, we want another party within our workflow to look at this invoice and the receiving report before those 2 documents flow to DFAS. And there's certain things we're looking for. We want to make sure that all the documentation's in place. And we also want to make sure before these 2 documents make it to DFAS that the funding is in place, also known as the obligations. So the LPO is a Navy role. The pay official, that's another government role, and that's DFAS. And once again, as I mentioned, DFAS, we make the payments within DoD. Another role is called a GAM, Group Administrator. Now, I don't have the other one listed, but it's called a CAM, but they both do the same thing. A CAM is for the vendor, and the CAM makes sure that anyone within your cage code who registers within wider workflow, that either they are allowed access to your cage code and wider workflow, or they deactivated once they leave your company. So basically, they are the gatekeeper of who has access to wider workflow for your cage code. On the government side, we have the same person, but they're called a GAM, Group Administrator. And they are just the gatekeeper for government users who want access to wider workflow. And then on the vendor side, again, we have the view-only role. And that role is if you want access to wider workflow as a vendor, but you just want to see what's going on. You're not going to create invoices. You're not going to do corrections or anything like that. you can sign in and register as view only. Now, the high-level workflow here is that users have to be registered in SAM, System for Award Management. And in the SAM system, there's all kind of government information there for your company within the SAM system. It identifies the type of company that you are. It identifies your cage code. It identifies what we call the EBPOC, Electronic Business Point of Contact, liaison for your company to the government. And so, but from a pay office perspective, from a DFAS perspective, one of the things that we're really interested in is that the banking information for your company is in SAM, because that's what we're going to EFT to you. That's how we're going to make payment to you off of that bank information in SAM. Now, in the SAM system, so you have to be registered in SAM, and usually it's the either EBPOC for your company, Electronic Business Point of Contact. It could be the CEO, it could be the president of your company, but you have to have your cage code registered in the SAM system. Annually, once a year, SAM is going to ask for you to update your record, because the information in there is so important. Particularly DFAS, we want to make sure that we're sending payments to you from the most updated banking information that you have. And so at least once a year, SAM is going to send a reminder for you to, just review, update information in SAM as needed.
Carol, I have a question for you.
Yes.
So in order to, because you mentioned on the prior screen, the roles that contractors have inside of wide area workflow. So when a contractor registers in SAM, they also have roles that they get assigned. So is the role that they put themselves in SAM, does that roll over into wide area workflow?
Not at all.
No. Okay.
Yes.
Those are two separate processes. Okay.
Mhm.
Okay.
So then we have EDA, and EDA is electronic document access, and those are where your electronic or digital contracts are uploaded from. And then EDA uploads or populates your invoices on Wider Workflow. You have an option for them to what we call pre-populate the contract information from EDA into Wider Workflow. If it does not populate, you can still, manually enter your contract information in. If it does populate, it's just a time saver, but it does not stop you. Now, at times, vendors will say, how come some of the contracts I have are populated in Wider Workflow, and others I have to manually enter the information into Wider Workflow? And that is because of the contract writing system that the contracting office uses. And so Wider Workflow has no control over the contract writing systems that the many different contracting offices use. But if so happens that you have to manually enter your screens, your fields in Wider Workflow, just know that it just did not pre-populate information from EDA into Wider Workflow. And then once again, my invoice, I have an arrow going over to my invoice from Wider Workflow, but actually my invoice is populated from the information from the pay system. It gives pay dates, it gives trace numbers, and so it gives a lot of information regarding that payment that will go out. And then electronically fund transfer to the bank information identified within the SAM system. Okay, who can use Wider Workflow? You, the vendor, and us, the government. Now, the 3 documents that you are interested in to satisfy payment is the contract. And these are the 3 documents from the pay office perspective that we need to make payment. We need the contract because we need to know what we're paying. We need the invoice because you have to ask to be paid. Okay, if you don't submit an invoice, it does not start the clock for payment. And then we need the receiving report. And once again, the receiving report comes from the acceptor, also in contracting terms, also known as the core contracting office representative. And that tells us what you're allowed to be paid. So just because you invoice for $100 to DFAS, we don't know what was satisfied on that performance until we get the receiving report from your customer. And so altogether, we call these 3 documents a 3-way match. And I just like to call them a trifecta for payment. To enter into WAW workflow, we have multiple ways of entering information into WAW workflow. You can sit down manually and input it via the web, or you can submit batch files in the form of FTP or EDI into WAW workflow. If you are interested in doing that, there's an 800 number on the homepage down at the bottom for Ogden, and you can contact them for help with submitting or creating your FTP or EDI files. Once the documents are in WAW workflow, it will flow to the government inspector or the government acceptor, and they will see what you're invoicing for and see what they've actually received, etc. A lot of times these 2 roles are the same person. Sometimes some agencies will separate the roles out. They'll have one person at their government site who will perform inspection, and then the other person who will sign for receipt and acceptance. But a lot of times that person performs, we will see where that one person performs both functions. Once again, if you have a Navy contract, those documents will stop at the LPO. From there, your invoice and receiving report will flow and upload at the pay office, DFAS. They will be entitled or cash managed into the pay system until the pay date comes for it to be released, electronically funds transferred to your bank account. On this slide here, here's a list of the different invoice types. Now, for you to know which invoice type to select, you have to read your contract or talk to your contracting office. These days, a lot of times the contracting offices will have what we call a WAWF instruction page, and it will list all kind of good information on it, including the type of invoice that they choose for you to use. Sometimes if your contract does not identify the type of invoice for you to select in WAW workflow, contact your contracting office and ask them. Just say, hey, I don't see the invoice type on my contract. Is there a specific one that is needed? But here we have the standalone invoice. We have a fast pay invoice, a 2-in-1, which is one of the common invoice types. And then we have what we call financing payments or invoice types, which are construction, commercial item financing, performance-based payments, and progress pays. A lot of times those type of invoices are used if you're doing business with DCMA. And then we have a standalone receiving report. Mostly you will not use the standalone receiving report, but it's there for those who need it. Excuse me. Another common invoice type is the combo. And then we have the reparables, cost vouchers, grant cooperative agreements, and these other pretty much invoice types that I don't really see them too often, but we do have miscellaneous payments and telecom. Excuse me. Now, to route a document in wider workflow, we route them. When you are ready to create your invoice in wider workflow, you have to identify the offices that your invoice will go to. So your invoice will leave you and it will go to your acceptor. Remember, your acceptor is the one who's going to, identify the type of work that you've performed. Or it may go to the LPO if you have a Navy contract, or it may go directly to DFAS, but the DODACs are what routes the documents. And so in wider workflow, we have what we call a DODAC routing screen. A lot of times that information is already pre-populated. So once you put your contract number in wider workflow will go out to EDA where your contract is loaded, find it and pull in this routing information. Now, if it does not find your contract in EDA, you can just look on the front page on your contract or look for your WAWF instruction page and look for the DODACs there. DODAC stands for Department of Defense Address and Activity Codes. Just like you have a cage code that identifies your company, the government has DODACs that identifies our departments, our agencies. And so that's what a DODAC is. Instead of saying, for instance, on the pay office DODAC, instead of saying, I'm sending my invoice to 3990 East Broad Street, Columbus, Ohio, the DODAC would say, I'm sending it to HQ 0131, which is one of the dozens of pay office DODACs that we have in Columbus. Okay, now to speak real quickly on two of the, what I would call the most general invoice types selections in wider workflow. The first one is the combo document. And so if you look at your contract and it says to use the combo document, this is the way the combo document flows. So you're ready to invoice, you provided your goods, and now your contract says select combo. And so once you create your combo document, that invoice will flow. If you have a Navy contract, the invoice will flow directly to the LPO. If you don't, just ignore that, and it will, your invoice will upload directly to the pay office. The status that we want to see this invoice in is in the process status. Now, there are some statuses that you may see before it gets to process. It may say extracted, which means that the pay office hasn't uploaded it from wider workflow into the pay system yet. And normally, if it's an extracted status, it takes 24 hours for it to move from wider workflow into the pay system at DFAS. Sometimes, let me go back one. Sometimes you may see something called a suspended status. Suspended just means that when it tried to upload your wider workflow document from wider workflow into the pay system, there were errors. And so it's suspended out. And so that means that there are pay technicians that are manually looking at your invoice to find out what the error was. If they identify what the error was and they identify that it's something that the vendor has to correct, then it will go from a suspended status to a rejected status. At the same time, on this combo document, a receiving report is created. Now, remember, the receiving report is the document that your government acceptor, your customer, signs to say, this is what we received from you. This is, it was in good shape. And this is what I am basically taking liability for, to say, I have received these goods in good form. Okay. And so on the combo document, the acceptor can do what we call a partial acceptance. So say, for instance, if you said that you submitted 100 widgets, but the acceptor said, yeah, I received 100 widgets, but 50 of them were damaged. they can only sign for 50. And so at DFAS, once we get that receiving report, although your invoice says 100 widgets on CLIN 1, the acceptor is only approving 50. So we will just pay the 50, what was approved. And there won't be a notification sent to you. You would just have to, once that receiving report is signed by your acceptor, you will receive an email notification. Just go into WAWF and see what the acceptor has signed. The other main document, or one of the other more common WAWF documents, is the 2-in-1. And so the 2-in-1 flows like this. So here you are, the government contractor, you provide the goods or services, and now you're ready to invoice. You go into WAWF, and your contract tells you to use the 2-in-1. So you select the 2-in-1, and here the flow of the 2-in-1 is it's the invoice and receiving report, but it's a single document. So as you saw with the combo document, the invoice took a separate route than the receiving report. On the 2-in-1, those two documents stay together. So here, the invoice and receiving report will flow to your government acceptor, and the government acceptor has to sign off. Now, the difference here, one of the biggest differences here with the 2-in-1 versus the combo document, it is all or nothing. The acceptor has to receive it in total or reject it, or reject it. So say, for instance, using that same example of the 100 widgets. So say, for instance, if you invoice for 100 widgets, but the acceptor said, yes, I received the 100 widgets, but 50 of them were damaged. They cannot do a partial acceptance. They have to reject the entire 2-in-1 back to you. So it's called all or nothing. So, but from here, once the acceptor signs off on the 2-in-1, the 2-in-1 will flow to the pay office and upload. And what you want to look for is for it to go into a process status. Process means that the pay office is in possession, is in total possession of your document. Okay, so if you see extracted status, it means that they have not uploaded it yet. If you see a suspended status, it means that they tried to upload it, but there was a problem. There were errors in the upload. Of course, you may see a rejected status after they review a suspended status and find out, okay, there were errors. Things that will cause an item to suspend or reject is if, one, the contract number is typed incorrectly. Two, if the CLIN information or the CLIN numbers are typed incorrectly. Another one is if you're invoicing for an amount that has over exceeded the amount, the balances on the CLIN. If you are invoicing for quantities that exceeds the balances, remaining balances on the CLIN. It may also suspend or reject if you've entered the wrong pay office. So if you routed it to the wrong pay offices. So these are some examples of what will cause a document to suspend or reject from the pay office. On this slide here, here's a list of some of the pay systems that we use at DFAS. Now, remember, once again, WAWF does not make the payment. WAWF is just the system where you invoice, and the invoice is submitted to DFAS and uploaded into one of these pay systems. These are the pay systems that our pay technicians use. One is CAPS. CAPS has been around a long time, but we use the term entitlement system, or we may use the term payment system interchangeably. So CAPS is one of the entitlement or pay systems that's used primarily for Army payments, defense agencies, or Marine Corps. And then we have EBS, basically used to pay DLA payments out of. We have IAPS, which is used to pay primarily Air Force payments. MOCAS, is the pay system used primarily to pay DCMA customers contracts. We have OnePay, which is the pay system used primarily for Navy, defense agencies, and Marine Corps. And then we have what we call our ERP systems. The Navy ERP is for Navy payments, GFIBS, which is the pay system for Army contracts, Army customers, and then DEAMS for Air Force, and then DAI for defense agencies. And so at all the DFAS sites that I mentioned earlier, like Columbus, Cleveland, Indianapolis, Limestone, they will use several of these systems. In Columbus, we use all of these systems. So we have that many pay teams in the Columbus office. On this slide here, this slide is just basically for your use. It talks about the different statuses of the documents. And, I've kind of already mentioned, some of the statuses that you want to look for. Let me point them out again. Submitted in Water Workflow, if you see a submitted status, that means that as the vendor, you've created your invoice, and now you are waiting for your government acceptor to take action. So if you see your invoice in, or your combo document 2-in-1, whichever one, if you have a WAWF document in a submitted status and it's been 3 months, 4 months, and you call DFAS and say, DFAS, why haven't you paid my invoice yet? It's because we don't have it yet. Your government acceptor has not taken action. Submitted means that you've created it, but your government customer has not signed for receipt and acceptance on it yet. And so you want to call your government acceptor because they're holding your payment up. That's one of the top reasons why payments go out late, is because the government acceptors just have not signed receiving reports in a timely manner. Once again, suspended, it means that the invoice did not successfully upload into the pay system. And I'm just want to say processed. Once again, it means that the pay office has successfully in possession of the document. And extracted means that it's waiting for the upload to occur. Usually that upload occurs within 24 hours. If it stays in extracted for 48 hours, pick up the phone and call customer service and just tell them that you have a WAWF document. It's been extracted for a period of time. Rarely, but it does happen. Sometimes a file upload break occurs, and they could be, the PMO could be working on correcting that. Email notifications. Emails are sent anytime action is taking place on a Water Workflow document. So here's an example of what an email looks like. And so say, for instance, if your acceptor signs off on your WAWF document, on your WAWF receiving report, you will get an email notification of the office that took action on it, the type of invoice, the current status, the contract number, etc. So you can, research it if you want to, but email notifications are sent. On this slide here, it just gives you information on the pay office, but Water Workflow also gives you the same information. It's just a matter of going into the lookup menu, and you can find your pay office in Water Workflow by the pay office DODAC, the pay system, and also it will give you the customer service number there as well. And then we have tutorials in Water Workflow. So from there, it's just a matter of going, when you get into Water Workflow, just click on the WBT module, and that stands for web-based training. And once you click on that, we have all kind of different modules that will give you tutorials and walk you through how to perform a certain task within wider workflow. Okay, and this is just information regarding the help desk for Ogden. And then this is just additional helpful information for you. So I will take questions, or if you want me to demonstrate creating a WAF document and the acceptor signing it, I can do that, I believe, in 10 minutes, but we'll just see what you want. Jill?
Okay, anyone have any questions? And thank you so much, Carol. I think that especially for firms that are new to federal government, this might be not something they need at the moment, like a live demonstration, but let me know if you would like for Carol to do a live demonstration in the chat, because it really is invaluable information. And what I love the best about this slide is the DFAS customer service number. Because I will tell you that they're very, very helpful. And not to, you know, I don't want anyone to think like to be scared off by this process, either in the cost price analysis either, because all of these things are being presented to you now so that you have a chance to just kind of get your feet wet and all of the different aspects in federal government contracting, but it all comes together. Okay, I don't see any questions coming through the chat at the moment.
Okay.
But I just want to give you a huge thank you again, Carol, for providing the presentation today. Okay, we do have, yes, we would like a live, please give us a live example.
Okay.
And so if you wouldn't mind doing it, there is the interest in it right now.
Okay. And it won't be more than 10 minutes.
Okay, perfect.
Okay. Let me see if I can switch over. Okay, can you see the welcome back screen?
Yes.
Okay.
My chair forward a little bit here.
Okay, so I am actually on one of the test sites right here for this demonstration. And I have to minimize, there we go. Okay, so I'm gonna log in. I'm gonna log in as the vendor. Let me get my login first here. Okay, so everyone, you can see the blue screen here with the modules here?
Yes.
Okay, so what I did was I used the user ID and password to log in. And, you know, once again, I'm on a test site that we use, one of the test sites that we use. And remember when I said that there's multiple modules here. Now looking over to the upper left-hand side, I'm a circle there. You see I'm in the Pi suite, and it happens to be version 6.12. These releases get pushed out every 5 months or so. New releases pushed out. So in the Pi suite, you may not have all of these modules because this is a test module that I'm in. But here's EDA. You will have EDA as a standard module load. And this is where your contracts, if you're looking for your electronic or digital version of your contract, you can come out here to EDA and enter the contract number that you're searching for, or the modification, or the solicitation number. It's out here in EDA. Here's my invoice. You can go into my invoice here in the Pi suite. And once you go into my invoice, just enter your cage code. And it will tell you about the payment that you are looking for, or when is the scheduled payment due date. And then down here at the bottom, the WBT, web-based training, this is where you will click on to see all the training modules of how to use things like wide area workflow, EDA, my invoice. They have tutorials for all of these modules in the WBT site. So here, I'm just going to go ahead and click on the WAWF module. Okay, Jill, do you see a white screen here?
Yes, it says welcome to wide area workflow.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
Sometimes when I go from window to window, sometimes Zoom stays on the previous window. So, okay, so from here, I'm going to go up to vendor. And in this one, I'm just going to create a combo document. So I'm going to go up to vendor. And once again, everything I'm doing right now, there's a tutorial out there for it. So I'm going to create this document, and I'm going to look for my company cage code. Now your cage code, to get set up, your electronic business point of contact, the one identified within SAM, will have to contact DISA Ogden, and that phone number is down here where it says vendor customer support. If you can see where my cursor is, and they would be the ones who will work with Ogden to get your company set up in wide area workflow. Once that cage code is set up in wide area workflow, then anyone within your company can do a self-registration right here at wide area workflow. So from here, I'm going to go ahead and select the cage code that's already loaded within wide area workflow.
Oh, Carol, are they going to switch over to UEIs?
I haven't heard that yet.
Okay.
But I will keep my ear open for that.
Okay.
Okay, then from here, I'll enter my contract number. Any place where I have an asterisk here, I want to enter. That's what we call a mandatory entry. We have to put something in before we can move to the next screen. Okay, so, and I'm just going to highlight the basic entries here, okay? So we're not doing this from a template. So from here, we're going to go down to the next button and move to the next screen. I don't know why that screen is held up.
Internet gremlins.
Okay, here we go. Okay, Jill, once you called them out, they decided to release and let me move on.
So we do have a question. Do you need to enter the company cage and DUNS numbers, or can you just use one of them?
Actually, it will already be preloaded.
Oh,
once it's set up, it will be loaded however, if you're using cage or cage and DUNS. And so, so when you go in, you don't have to enter that. You just select it because it will already be preloaded for your company. Okay, so from here, I'm going to enter my pay office.
And they get that from their contract.
Yes.
Correct. Okay.
Okay, and so on this screen here, I'm going to select the invoice type. And so in this example, I'm going to use the invoice and receiving report combo, which is the invoice and receiving report. Okay, once I do that, I'm going to scroll down and click next and move to the next screen. And this is the screen that will route this invoice. It is called the routing screen. Normally, this information will be pre-populated. White Arrow Flow would have gone out to EDA, found your contract, and loaded the DODAX here. In this case, I'm just going to manually key it in. If it does not find your contract in EDA, you'll just manually key it in like I'm going to do. But you would either look on your WAWF instruction page within your contract and find, and a lot of times the contracting office will tell you the DODAX to use, or you just look on the front page of your DD 1155 or whatever contract that you're using and look for these codes. If it's the admin code or the ship to code, just enter it in. And so I'm going to go ahead and enter in the codes that I have here. The ship to is identifying your government acceptor. Okay, now here we have the combo document. And so I am going to start on the header tab. And I'm not going to go over all these tabs for the sake of time. I'm just going to hit the header tab and the line item tab where your contract line items are at for this demonstration. So from here on the header tab, I'm focusing on the asterisk fields, which is the shipment number. And the shipment number can be whatever your company decides that they use for a shipment number. Some companies will use their invoice numbers. Some companies will use some form of a 3-character code of their company name with sequential numbering behind it. Some companies will use their delivery ticket numbers. So it's up to you. If you are doing business with DCMA or another customer that says they have a particular format that you want to use for their shipment number, then you would use whatever your customer tells you to use for your shipment number, at least a format type. And so here, I'm just going to go ahead and enter my invoice number that I'm using for this particular combo document. The data shipment, I'm just going to use my calendar. And for this example, I'm going to say that we shipped it today, and that has an asterisk. And I'm going to jump over to the right to the other asterisk field for the sake of time. And I'm going to say, no, this is not the final shipment. I have other subsequent shipment to do. The invoice date is automatically filled in, and the final invoice, no, this is not the final invoice off of this contract. So once I filled out the asterisk fields on this header tab, I'm going to go over to the line item tab. Now, you know, normally in a classroom, I'll go over the address tab, discount tag, all these tabs. But just for this demonstration, I'm just going to hit the highlights. So I'm going to click on the line item tab. The line item tab is where your contract line item numbers are, also known as the cleanse. The cleanse is what you perform by on your contract. It has your quantities, it has your unit prices on it. That is how the money is obligated off of that contract. And also that's how you will invoice off of the cleanse, the individual contract line item numbers. So here I'm going to go down, and the line item details, those are your cleanse. I'm going to click action, under action, the add button. And I'm just going to say I'm billing off of cleanse 1. Okay. Of course, on contracts, you have cleanse and slins and elins and things like that. I'm just focusing on a basic cleanse. Okay, the next area that we come to is a product service ID number. Okay, we have an asterisk. That's what I'm going to focus on here. And so that number would be identified within that cleanse itself or the description. So we're going to just say here's the product number for this cleanse. And over here, that number that I just put in, it is part of a manufacturer part number that I entered in, and I got that off of the cleanse itself in the contract. We're going to say on this cleanse 10001, I shipped 10 items, and the unit of measure on that cleanse is each. That's identified on the cleanse itself, the unit of measure. And that unit price for that CLIN is $150 for each one of these items. And so then I'm going to scroll down here and I'm going to focus on the asterisk field here. That's the mandatory field. And I'm going to say that these are actually widgets that I have delivered and now I am invoicing for. And so from here, I'm going to go to the bottom and click Save CLIN. And Wider Workflow will allow you to bill 999 CLINs per invoice.
It's a lot of CLINs.
Right.
So if someone finds that they've made an error on their invoice, is it an easy fix to go in and change it? Or does that take months to get it fixed or weeks or
they can recall it. They have a couple options. If they've already submitted it, but the acceptor has not taken action on that document yet, or the pay office is not in possession of it, the vendor can recall that invoice back in their possession and make the correction and then resubmit it. Or if the acceptor has signed off on it, or the pay office is in possession of it, they will have to contact them and ask them to reject the invoice back to them.
okay. Okay.
Okay, so here we have that one CLIN that I did. And then from here, I'm just going to go ahead and submit. Now I could, review this document, look it over, but I'm just going to go ahead and submit it. I have the one CLIN that I'm billing on and I'm satisfied with it and I'm going to submit. It seemed like the system is running slow. It must know the weekends around the corner.
So once from the time they hit submit, given that everything is correct, how long until they receive payment?
Well, then we talk about the Prompt Payment Act, because there's a lot of things that go into play when we talk about the Prompt Payment Act. I always tell the vendors, if you provided the goods and services, submit your invoice. There have been times when I've talked to government offices and their government customer tells them, don't submit your invoice until I tell you to. But what happens is that the vendor wants to submit their invoice because they want to get what we call the prompt payment clock started. And so that means that if the government is responsible for holding your invoice up for whatever reason, interest will be calculated based off of a number of dates, and not getting that invoice in and getting that clock started will be to the benefit of the vendor. So to say when will you be paid after you submit it, it just depends on a lot. It depends on the acceptor, because we have to have the receiving report. Okay, the acceptor has to sign the receiving report. How long is it taking the acceptor to sign the receiving report? So there's multiple things that go into play, but the vendor can track all of that in Wider Workflow. So here we received a message that the invoice and receiving report were successfully submitted. So if we go into the vendor's history folder here, you will see that this particular invoice right here, we'll see here that it was a combo, and the DD stands for destination inspection and destination acceptance. And if I scroll over, there's the contract number. If I clicked on that, I can view the contract, which is an EDA. Here is the receiving report, and it tells us that the receiving report was submitted. It has not been signed for acceptance by your government customer yet, and that is in a submitted status. And so remember, whenever I told you that if a document's in a submitted status in Wider Workflow, it means that the government has not taken action on that yet. So we know here, as long as this receiving report's in a submitted status, payment will not be made. And that is one of the biggest holdups that we have. The acceptor is who you're doing business with. That's your customer. That's who you provided the goods to or the performance to. And they haven't gone into Wide Flow and signed it yet. Here's where you will click the recall if you wanted to get it back, if you found out that you made an error on it and want to get it back and make the correction. And then over here on the invoice side, the invoice piece of this combo document is at the pay office, and it is waiting for the pay office to upload this invoice into the pay system. Once this receiving report, moving back over to the left, once this receiving report is signed by your government customer, the acceptor, it will go from submitted into an extracted status. Once it's uploaded from Wide Flow into the pay system, it will go into a process status. And just 2 more minutes, I'm going to log in. I'm gonna exit out of here and log in as the acceptor and sign off on this receiving this combo document. So okay, so I have my acceptor hat on now, and I received an email notification that a vendor has submitted a combo document to me in Wide Workflow. I'm going to access Wide Workflow as the government acceptor who you are doing business with. I've logged in under my account. I'm going to go into my acceptance folder and put in my office DODAC. Remember, our DODACs are the equivalent to your cage codes. It's an identifier for us. And I'm going to find the invoice that was submitted because the email told me what the invoice number was. Here it is. I found it. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to look for the receiver report, which is right here, identified as the shipment number. I'm going to open it. And one of the things I want to do is make sure that the contract number that you entered is correct. I want to see how many CLINs that you have identified on this WAWF document, because I want to know how much work I have ahead of me. If there's 900 CLINs, I have to look at each and every CLIN. Okay, from there, I'm going to go up to the line item tab. One, I will go to the miscellaneous tab to see if there's any attachments that you've added that I need to look at, to see if there's any comments that you've made that I need to look at. From there, I'm going to go to the line item tab, and I'm going to identify how many that I'm approving, so that you say that you shipped 10. I'm going to say, yes, I received 10. And on this combo document, I could put in less for acceptance. But in this example, I'm going to say, yes, I'm accepting all 10, which means that the pay office, once we receive this in, we're going to pay off of the quantity accepted right here, the 10. And so if I accept it for less, then I will go up to the miscellaneous info tab and explain why I'm approving for a lesser amount. If there was a problem, if it wasn't what I ordered, if it was damaged in delivery, those are some examples. So from there, I will go back to the header tab once I've identified what I've inspected and what I'm approving for acceptance by the government. I'm gonna click down here under CQA for contract quality assurance. Means that I have done my quality assurance against the items that were delivered to me, and I'm accepting them. And then I'm going to put in my date that I received your goods. And then I'm going to put in the date, hold on. And then I'm going to put in the date of acceptance. And so the government, we may receive the goods on one date, but we have 7 days to perform acceptance on them according to the prompt pay. So from here, once I put in my dates of receipt and dates of acceptance of your goods, then I will sign it. And it says that it was successfully accepted. And then as the vendor, you just received notification. And although I'm going to look at this in the acceptor side, if you went into your folder as a vendor, you would, and pull the document up, you will see that it has been received by the government acceptor. Here's the receiver report. It now has an acceptance date. That's what you want. And if I open up the receiver report and go down to the bottom, And this is just a quick demo. You will see that it's been signed for acceptance and the amount that was received on it. And so then from there, you will go into my invoice to find your payment due date. And most payments, most contracts are what we call net 30, which means that when they calculate a payment due date, they're going to calculate 30 days from the date of acceptance. Normally, the prompt payment says that whichever is the latter of the two, the payment, the invoice receipt date or the acceptance date. And normally the government acceptance date is the latter. So they would add 30 days on to the acceptance date to come up with the payment due date. A lot of pay offices are operating under what we call cash management waiver, which means that they will make payment as soon as they possibly can. So you have to know if your pay office is working under what we call a cash management waiver. A lot of times when cash management waiver came into place, it's because they were presidential orders which said that they're trying to get the economy, put a bump in the economy. And so they were not holding payments or cash managing them. They were releasing them as soon as possible. So, okay,
Right.
so with that.
Thank you so much. And I apologize. I actually have to get off here to pick up my daughter from volleyball camp, but I really appreciate all the information. If you wouldn't mind, Carol, could you take putting your email address in the chat for anyone or you know what, if anyone has questions for Carol, you can email me and I'd be happy to give her, give her contact information. Okay. All right, does anyone have any questions? All right, well, I certainly appreciate your time today. Thank you so much.